Maharaj Yusuf that said even our own bodies don't belong to ourselves. We think we're the Lord of our own bodies, but our bodies actually belong to our parents when we're young. They belong to our superiors when we're in the workplace. They belong to the worms and the ants when we're buried in the ground. So even our own bodies don't belong to us. There's always a superior person. I think it was the late Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj who coined the phrase servant leader. I think it's a fairly common phrase, servant leader. One becomes a leader, but there's always someone above. Just like we have in our temple, we have the temple president, we have the GDC, we have above the GDC, we have Prabhupada, above Prabhupada we have Krishna, we have the circuit succession. So it's a common thing in academia to avoid plagiarism, but we, just like Krishna Das Kaviraj at the end of every chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita, he offers his obeisances to the Goswamis. He says, I always depend on your mercy. People often equate God is very fierce, and even sometimes Prabhupada exhibited some kind of, not exactly fierce, but kind of harsh behavior. There's a picture of him pointing his finger, and he said that when you deal with someone who's clever, you have to be twice as clever. And in other words, Krishna has to be twice as always more clever. There's an incident of I forget where I read this, but somewhere in Prabhupada's teachings that a husband and wife were in bed together, and she had some very opulent jewelry on. And this devotee sneaked into the bedroom at night when they were asleep and stole the jewelry off this lady's body. And she kind of knew that it was happening, and she kind of knew that it was a devotee, so she didn't chastise him or wake up or tell him that he shouldn't be doing it. But he actually stole all the jewelry and used it for propagating Krishna consciousness. So in a sense, he was violating regulated principles, because what is, after all, there's a man doing in a lady's bed at night? But because it was for a higher purpose in life, he was able to prevail. And it said in one of the Goswami's writings, I think it's Sanatana Goswami's in Hare Bhakti Vilas, that one should learn to love Krishna, and that always remembering and never forgetting Krishna is superior to all the regulated principles that we're destined to follow and we're prescribed to follow. There was an instance once when some devotees were having a darshan with Prabhupada, and one of them, who was a very championship book distributor, the biggest book distributor in the room, one of the biggest book distributors in the world, said, Prabhupada, what pleases you the most? And he was kind of hoping that Prabhupada would say that book distribution is what pleases you the most. But Prabhupada didn't answer immediately. He thought for about 10 seconds, then he said, just try to learn to love Krishna. Unfortunately, it happens that sometimes people who are on the front lines or doing great service are doing it, they have an ulterior motive. They're doing it maybe for name and fame. They're not doing it to please Krishna necessarily. So Prabhupada kind of sensed that might have been happening with this person. And I don't want to name names, but this was a very famous person. I don't know if he's still around. He was doing a lot of big service. And he kind of thought that Prabhupada was going to say that his service was the best service. But Prabhupada knew that it could be even mechanical. There could be an ulterior motive. And so he said that just try to learn to love Krishna. That's the most important thing in life. People, as I was saying before, people often equate Krishna with death. I was in New Zealand once, driving along the road, and I saw a billboard, road sign, and it was on the road sign was a picture of an automobile speedometer, and it had a dial, and it was one of those non-digital ones that has a dial, and it started out 10 kilometers per hour, 20 kilometers per hour, 30, and when it got up to about 70 or 80, instead of having numbers, it had a picture of a coffin with a cross on it. So somehow or other, it was a kind of a warning from the government of New Zealand to not drive the car very fast because you might die. But instead of saying death, it just had a picture of a coffin and a cross. So it made people think of death as God, as death. There's another aspect to this very fierce idea of Krishna killing. In the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna appears very, very frightful to Arjuna. He sees that he has enormous teeth, and he's causing the death of all these warriors. Sometimes Krishna is very fierce, but one thing that's really interesting is that demonic elements cannot remain in the presence of Krishna. One of the ways we were taught to always drive away ghosts was to chant the name of the Lord. And there was an instance once when devotees were staying at John Lennon's house in England, and I was in the audience once when this lecture was being given by Prabhupada, and it was in Conway Hall in Red Lion Square in London. And I heard the name John Lennon. I thought, why is Prabhupada mentioning this name of this person? You know, that he's just a singer, he's famous, a celebrity. But I thought, well, why is Prabhupada? And then he told the story. He said, we drove the ghost away from John Lennon's house. He told the audiences. And then the actual story was that there actually was some kind of a ghost. Not in John Lennon's main house, but in one of the buildings on the property. And there was a very burly kind of Scotsman who heard sounds emanating from, he thought was the attic, and it sounded like a body was being dragged in chains across the floor. He couldn't sleep at night, and he was a very strong Scotsman. But he was so proud he didn't want to tell people that he heard this ghost up above. But somehow his wife told the other devotee girls that this was going on, and she was fearful that he was going to lose his job because he couldn't work. He was actually a bricklayer when he lived in that house. And he thought that he couldn't sleep at night because he heard these sounds, and she was very afraid that he would be fired, that he would lose his job because he couldn't work. So then it eventually came to Prabhupada's attention that there was a ghost in this building. And so he instructed the devotees to go into that house and to have a very vibrant kirtan that would last 3 or 4 hours, and they should blow conch shells, sprinkle water, and do all kinds of things that would supposedly drive this ghost away. So it so happened that the ghost was driven away. And the man got good night's sleep, and he started to lay bricks and did his job. And his wife and he were very grateful because it all came out that Prabhupada instructed the devotees to go into that room and blow the conch shell and ask all the inhabitants of the house to depart, to go away while this was going on, this big kirtan. And Prabhupada said in one lecture, I think it was in Hawaii in about 1976, that there was a haunted house. I think it was in the city of Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh in India. And because it was haunted, very few, almost no one ever wanted to live in it. It was for rent for 1,000 rupees. And Prabhupada told the devotees that he offered 200 rupees for the house. And they said, okay, well, we'll take it because no one else wanted the house. So he could understand that there was a ghost in the house. And he said he chanted Hare Krishna, and he was able to survive and live in the house, and the ghost was driven away. So it does happen that ghosts cannot remain. And this incident of Lord Nrsimhadev appearing is kind of like that. There was a very ghostly, horrible, demonic person in the name of Hiranyakashipu. And because he was harassing his devotee, Lord Nrsimhadev appeared and dispatched him. It's very important. It just kind of shows that demonic elements and ghosts can't remain in the presence of the Lord. So the presence of the Lord is in the holy name. We chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. We're not only feeling spiritual bliss, but we're driving away all the inimical elements that attack us. And the history of ISKCON is one of attack by the demons. If you look into the history of the movement of Krishna consciousness started in about 1966. We'll see that there's always been elements of opposition. Sometimes in the form of government opposition, sometimes in the form of so-called neighborly opposition. When the movement first started in 1966, it was on 26th 2nd Avenue. 26th 2nd Avenue was Second Avenue was a very long street. 26th 2nd Avenue was a building of flats or apartments. On the ground floor was a temple. And Second Avenue is a street, it's a very busy street in Manhattan, in New York. and it's full of big cars and trucks rumbling down the street, and starting at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, or even earlier than that. It's very noisy. And sometimes the garbage trucks come. You've seen these garbage trucks that come here where they pick up the bins and turn them upside down. Well, I don't know, they have some kind of a system in Manhattan where the garbage trucks come and collect garbage, but they're very extremely noisy. They're noisier than even these ones that pick up the bins and dump them into the trucks. Anyway, Kirtan started in 26 2nd Avenue when there was a temple on the ground floor at 7 o'clock. So the people sometimes complain, the tenants up above complain, even though there were trucks rumbling and automobiles constantly going down the street and garbage trucks coming along. It was very extremely noisy, but they never ever complained even once. But as soon as Kirtan started at 7 o'clock, they started complaining in a big way. Sometimes they even called the police just to interfere with the chanting because they couldn't tolerate it. And it wasn't really noisy chant. It was just kind of Hare Krishna, and Krishna Krishna, like medium to quiet compared to the noise that they tolerated. So that was, from the very beginning, there was always a great deal of opposition. It happened in different cities. It happened in London. There was one person who thought that we were too noisy, and at one point a representative of the Ministry of Public Building and Works came along and tried to pass it. He said, we'll have a meeting with this man. His name was Mr. French. Prabhupada called him a drunkard, and he was a drunkard. He operated a fruit stall in Covent Garden, part of London. And he just kind of like lost it. He said, okay, this is the last straw. You guys have to leave. I can't tolerate it any longer. So it came to this government agency called the Ministry of Public Building and Works. And the representative came, and he had Mr. French come, and all the devotees were, and his job was to pacify everyone. It was to kind of make peace and not have such animosity going on. And at one point, this man, Mr. French, just pulled open the door to walk out, and because the devotees were inattentive to a lot of details, he pulled out the door handle and almost fell over backwards. And in a typically British manner, the Mr. Wallace, who was the representative of the Ministry of Public Buildings and Works, said, now, Mr. French, there's no need to get really hot under the collar. Because he was ranting and raving. Before that, he was just saying, oh, these guys are all liars, they're just good talkers, and he was getting very red in the face, and he got up and started to walk out, and that's when this gentleman said that no need to get so hot under the collar. Anyway, then he wanted to find out if the noise, and the room was actually soundproofed, but somehow this man was complaining because he just didn't like us or something like that. And eventually we had to move because there was another man in that it was a big block of flats. There were about maybe 30 or 40 flats, and got all the neighbors to sign a petition to remove us, and eventually we had to actually leave that place and got Soho Street. So that was the story that happened at Sevenberry Place. It was we had a temporary permission to have a temple and a kitchen, and it was just by a very, very slim margin that they voted for it. And it was only because we had a friend in the council who kind of said, well, they're harmless people, they're not going to really do any harm. Sometimes the neighbors even thought that we were putting a hex on them because the chants somehow went through the soundproofing in the brick wall over into their flats, and they started coughing and choking, and they thought we were doing some kind of witchcraft. And so there was always a lot of opposition even from the very start on the very place. So I think we're probably going to have to end here. I don't want to go over time like sometimes happens, and maybe have some questions, and then we can go a little bit over time if breakfast isn't going to go out.
You know the story of how the devotees got moved out in LA. They were moved out from their residence in LA.
Well, from what I know, I wasn't in Los Angeles at the time, but from before they got the place that they're currently in, there were two other places. There was a place on what's called Hollywood Boulevard, and one day I was told that the devotees found all their belongings were on the sidewalk in front of the storefront where the temple was. So without even giving them any notice, the person who actually owned the premises just chucked everything out and put a lock on the door so they couldn't go in, and all their possessions were on the street. So the opposition was very great all the time. That was I think, the initial temple in that city. I don't know what happened with the other place, but
They found some old lady let them use their garage. Let them use her garage.
for a while they were limited to an automobile garage because there was no, and even Prabhupada was lecturing in that garage. So there was a lot of opposition even from the very start. Even after the devotees got the temple on 3764 Watsika, there was a lot of opposition. The neighbors thought, oh, these people aren't working, and why is Prabhupada coming in such a big, fancy car? And they were very, very inimical. And when I went there, I thought, well, they're going to kick us out. But somehow or other, we survived. Somehow, Krishna was victorious. And Lord Nrsimhadev appears in many temples because we feel that we need protection against the demonic elements of life. There's the governments, and Prabhupada even said in my lecture that the governments are actually demonic. I mean, and I know that's a very severe thing to say, but it was police forces and governments who gave us a lot of, who used to give us a lot of trouble. Now it's a little bit different, but in the beginning, because devotees, and especially in the United States, were very different, there was a whole movement against them. They were called the programmers, and there were court cases and all sorts of things. And now people are getting a little bit more accepting Hare Krishnas a little bit more. But there's always demonic elements or material elements against spiritual elements. It's kind of like in physics, there's centrifugal force and centrifugal force, or gravity and the opposite thing. So there's always a conflict or a competition between the demonic or the atheists and the theists. It always exists. Even in the higher planetary systems, there's a kind of an ongoing conflict between the suras and the asuras, the so-called devatas or the demigods and the demons. There's kind of like they're at war with each other all the time. That's still part of the material world. It's a very higher part of the material world, but it's still part of it. So, yes.
There's no question. We've made an announcement for everyone here this Sunday. Policy. I'm sure a lecture on policy in the political group.
Oh, it's going to be every Ekadasi, sorry?
Every policy, and it'll be, and most lectures, at least the first couple of lectures, we're going to have subtitles. So
We're going to be lectures that are videotaped? Is that
yeah.
Okay, so every, I hope I'm saying this right, but it means every Ekadasi, there's going to be a film of Prabhupada giving a lecture. Bhagavatam class. I guess we'll have to try to darken the room.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
It'll be fine, okay.
This starting this Sunday.
Starting this Sunday. So be sure to see Prabhupada, so you can see him in action. Yes. Does everyone in the material world have a demonic mentality?
Well, to a degree.
To a degree. Well, I think even to a degree that everyone who's sitting in this room has a demonic mentality. I think in one lecture, Prabhupada said that we should always remember our past sinful activities. So there's a tendency, there's always a great pull towards materialism against spiritualism. So even though we're sitting here, as soon as we go out and see, oh, nature is very beautiful, the trees are very beautiful, the birds sing very beautifully, the sun is very beautiful, that's all material. And so we're attracted to these material things. And then we might completely forget Krishna because of all this wonderful beauty that surrounds us. It's very easy to do. So again, it's necessary to always remember and never forget Krishna, even in times of great temptation by the material world. And there always will be temptation. Yes?
Can I say something about the Kodashi playing Prabhupada's actions?
You've already said something, you could say something more.
I've already said something?
Yes. Go ahead.
So I was wondering, is this going to be like an ongoing thing for every Kodashi that we're going to be doing?
That's the plan. So starting this Sunday and till the end of time, if such a thing exists. Every Ekadashi will see a movie of Srila Prabhupada speaking, lecturing. Is that right?
Some will be like slideshows with the lecture and subtitles.
I see.
There's not that many movies with Prabhupada giving lectures.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is like in Govardhana they do this all the time, as you know.
So some of these movies, so-called movies, will be in the form of slides that will come one after the other.
Some are actual movies with Prabhupada.
Of what?
Some are actual movies.
And some are actual films of Prabhupada speaking. I think we're going to have that this Sunday.
They're all staying.
So the reason I'm asking is because speaking rather than about this, how when people are seeing something and hearing something, as they have, promoted on their communities, when you see something and hear something together at the same time, you remember it a lot better. And I know this from personal experience, when you're hearing Prabhupada's lectures and if you're reading the transcriptions at the same time, which also helps because sometimes devotees may not be so familiar with Prabhupada's accent. Your absorption in what is being said can increase. And Govardhana told the story, he said that they used to, he noticed that in the Vrindavan, when they were playing the Prabhupada's lectures on the Kodashis, they would watch, and sometimes the devotees in the audience, because there was no one on the Vyasasana, sometimes the devotees they'd be sitting here and sometimes they'd sort of start to... No, the audio was just coming through the loudspeaker, but they would combine it with having the transcription of the lecture so you could read it and hear it at the same time. And his comment was, when he did that, then nobody fell asleep. Then they were engaged like that again.
That's a very good comment. I think one of the reasons that people fell asleep was that sometimes they didn't understand what Prabhupada was saying because of his accent.
No, that they were just, they were got off because, they'd be a bit tired and there wasn't that visual engagement. But I also personally found, because I went through all of Prabhupada's lectures in that way, that when you're reading it and hearing it, the odd word that, you may not pick up, you can, by sound, you can read it. And it does also, I think it tends to stay in memory better, if you
see the word written down.
So I just thought I'd mention that if there's some way that we can think about that in our presentations.
I think that most of, if not all of the movies of Prabhupada speaking now have subtitles. Is that correct?
The whole idea is to do that. We're going to do it.
So even if they don't have it, we're going to do it. We're going to do it.
There's a range available and subtitles and...
So probably most of the movies will have subtitles.
Yeah, but my understanding is that there are lectures when we don't have the DVD of the lecture, but we have the audio.
Yes, there's subtitles for them as well.
So when you read the transcription.
Yes.
In the Indian Parliament, think that some of these Europeans and Americans aren't the genuine article. There's still a lot of opposition. And it comes through in the form of the laws that are passed not only in India, but in other countries that are kind of, saying that new cults or newfangled religions or incarnations of religions are not acceptable. So there's still some level of opposition. It's still an ongoing fight. Yes. I mean, I don't want to sound morbid, but it's not like everything is peaches and cream. Yes.
Maharaj and Kali ignorant in general, all the leaders and politicians are generally corrupt and demoniac. You probably pointed that out. How can we understand people, even though they're exposed, these leaders as cheaters again and again all around the world? How can we understand that people have so much faith in them? Blind faith.
Well, the question was, why do people have so much faith in corrupt governments still, even though they know that there's something wrong? Just like there's a saying in English that the only sure things are death and taxes. There's a kind of opposition to the government because there's a lot of taxes for almost everything you do, including walking across the street and dying. But people pay their taxes anyway. They just do it because they have to. So that's one of the reasons why people seem to comply with various laws, even though they know there's a lot of corruption. It's because they have no choice. They just have to do it. And they do it also because they're kind of like, they think similarly, that, okay, rock music is very good, and celebrities are above the law, and all that sort of thing. You know, and even governments sometimes don't enforce it when it comes to celebrityhood. And everyone is after money. Not only governments, but individuals are after money. And it's all kind of like, and I hate to sound morbid, but it's all kind of demonic. Everyone is trying to improve the situation that they have, including governments. And a lot of times there's opposition to big governments or big corporations because people realize that they are after money. But the people themselves are after money. So it's kind of like a hypocritical thing. And that's one of the reasons why they support these so-called corrupt governments, because they're corrupt themselves. I mean, I don't want to run down individuals, because everything has its glories and its faults. But an intelligent person has to understand that there's difficulties. Prabhupada was lecturing, I think I told this about this once in London, on the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which to a lot of people is very hard to understand because it's just a Sanskrit list of warriors. But he was saying that how the Kuru army was assessing the strength of the Pandava army. And they were surprised that so many armies from different parts of the world came to join them. And in the lecture he said that this is intelligence, to assess the strength of the enemy. And he gave the example of a businessman. The businessman is always trying to get more money. And one of the ways he's successful is to know the strength of his enemies, that someone can come along and be more successful than he is and can remove all of his money and remove his success. There's an actual instance of a company that was formed in Manhattan about 25 years ago called Tropical Delight. And their competitors were Coca-Cola and 7-Up. And because they didn't make friends with the drivers that were delivering Coca-Cola and 7-Up in the upper part of Manhattan, Harlem, the black people, these drivers of Coca-Cola and 7-Up became very afraid. So they produced a little pamphlet that they stuck on poles all around Harlem that said that the Tropical Delight contains a chemical element that will cause black people to die. And it was completely fabricated, but the people of Harlem started to believe it. And as a result, Tropical Delight went out of business. So this is an argument for making friends with even inimical people or your neighbors, even though they may be inimical. We have to establish good relations with them. I don't know why I brought this up. That's an important point. That even though the people people can be changed from a very materialistic, demonic life to devotees. I mean, if we look at almost everyone in this room, what kind of lives we were leading before, it's proof that it can happen, that we can change from being very materialistic to very spiritual, or from being atheistic to theistic. It can happen. It can happen both ways. A theist or a devotee can become a non-devotee, unfortunately. That's part of the strength of the inimical force. So Maya is very powerful. So one has to be aware, just like Prabhupada was saying in that lecture, of the strength of the so-called enemy. It's actually very powerful. We can be drawn into material existence at any point and forget our Krishna consciousness. It can happen. So there's param yadvi param atesham is saying, it's part of a famous verse, Samashrite Padavapalabam, that there's danger at every step. To replace it was also very corrupt, and it's still in France. It's a big thing to overcome the atheistic and demonic elements.
So the answer, Rupert's, in my comment, is that there's a level of futility. They recognise that the nature of the government has been flawed, but they have to just give up, because what hope? Next government, same thing, you know.
Same thing, and we're the same way. If we were the government, we would probably do the same thing they're doing, even though we say we won't. But anyway,
so people are advancing more towards taking the drugs and the alcohol as a way for compensation, you know.
Yeah, if we take intoxication, we forget about all the difficulties of life, and that's why people do it. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srimad Prabhupada ki jai.